Here's what the cameras never meant to capture. Not the explosions, but the silences between them. In the 80 seconds and 90 seconds, certain action films whispered something dangerous about honor turned into currency, justice doubling as revenge, chains of power hiding in plain sight, small towns quietly bleeding, and memories that refused to stay buried. They were marketed as simple thrills, yet they felt like confessions, VHS tapes, humming with secrets that theaters couldn't hold. If you listen closely, you can still hear the edits breathe. The cuts admit what the dialogue couldn't. These are the 5 films that revealed what Hollywood tried to hide. In the late 1980 seconds and early 1990 seconds, Hollywood's golden age of action was beginning to crack. The heroes who once saved nations now fought ghosts of their own creation. It was an era of overexposed muscles, underexposed motives, and studios rushing to produce adrenaline while cutting away the conscience beneath. Yet among the hundreds of films that flooded video stores, a handful dared to speak the truth that the system was broken, and the heroes were merely its reflection. These films carried the scars of the Cold War, the paranoia of political betrayal, and the fatigue of endless wars that America could never truly win. Beneath the gunfire, they spoke of lost codes of honor, corrupted justice, and forgotten identities. And perhaps that's why they vanished, not because they failed at entertainment, but because they succeeded too much at honesty. Some of them were dumped straight to VHS, others quietly shelved, their messages too raw for the big screen. But decades later, they remain fragments of truth caught between reels and reality. Let's rewind to the 5 films that crossed the line between entertainment and confession. Film 1, Rage and Honor, 1992. It begins in the neon-lit alleys of Los Angeles, a city that pretends to sleep. Rage and Honor wasn't just another martial arts film. It was a mirror reflecting what America had become at the dawn of the 90 seconds. Chaotic, divided, and hungry for redemption. Directed by Terrence H. Winkless and starring Cynthia Rothrock and Richard Norton, the film promised the usual kicks and explosions. But beneath the choreography, something deeper pulsed. Rothrock's character, Chris Fairchild, is a teacher by day, fighter by destiny, an outsider trying to hold onto a sense of honor in a world that rewards rage. Every punch she throws feels less like action, more like protest, a cry against moral decay. Norton's inner conflict as a cop caught between loyalty and truth adds to the tension, turning what could have been a simple fight flick into a coded allegory about corruption inside the institutions meant to protect. Shot with low budgets but high conviction, Rage and Honor plays like a VHS sermon, grainy, unpolished, real. Its message? That in a world where justice has a price tag, honor becomes the only rebellion left. When the final blow lands, you realize the title wasn't about combat. It was about survival, the quiet war between what we feel and what we're told to obey. Film 2, Excessive Force 2, Force on Force, 1995. The title alone sounds like a parody of 90 seconds action excess. Yet Excessive Force 2 hides a rare heartbeat beneath its bullets. Directed by Jonathan Winfrey and starring Stacey Randall, the film unfolds in a world still trembling from the aftershocks of the Los Angeles riots. Justice is no longer a promise. It's a performance, staged for those who still believe the system works. Randall's character, Harley Cordell, is a former cop framed by the very people sworn to protect her. On the surface, she's just another revenge-driven heroine. But look closer, Excessive Force 2 questions whether vengeance and justice are ever truly separate. Every gunshot feels like an echo of societal decay, where police badges gleam brighter than truth, and violence becomes the only language people still understand. The film's limited release and direct-to-video fate were not accidents, they were a burial. Studio executives cut scenes that showed institutional failure too directly. What remained was a shell of action wrapped around a censored confession. Still, through its rough edges, Excessive Force 2 whispers something haunting. When justice becomes excessive, what's left to believe in? The explosions fade. But that question lingers long after the credits roll. Film 3, Chain of Command, 1994. It begins in the shadow of collapsing empires. The Cold War has ended, but its soldiers and their secrets remain. Chain of Command, directed by David Worth and starring Michael Dudikoff, isn't just a story about espionage and betrayal. It's a reflection of what happens when obedience replaces morality. Dudikoff plays Merrill Ross, a soldier of fortune caught in a web of political deceit. He follows orders until the orders no longer make sense. The action is pure 90 seconds, missiles, deserts, betrayals under fluorescent light. But buried beneath the explosions lies a bitter truth that loyalty, once weaponized, becomes a form of captivity. The chain isn't just military. It's psychological, emotional, national. Every order Ross follows tightens that invisible leash around his conscience. The camera lingers not on victory, but on hesitation, the split second where a man realizes he's been serving the wrong master. The film's modest release and muted reception were predictable. Hollywood had no appetite for stories that suggested America's heroes might be complicit in their own undoing. But Chain of Command endures because it dares to say what others only hint, that freedom is meaningless when obedience is absolute. In the final frame, the chain doesn't break, it just slips out of view, waiting for the next soldier to wear it. Film 4. Quiet Cool, 1986. The camera opens on a forest wrapped in mist, the kind of silence that doesn't comfort, but warns. Quiet Cool, directed by Clay Boris and starring James Remar, was marketed as a straightforward backwoods revenge thriller. But what it really delivered was an unspoken critique of American decay hidden beneath rural calm. Remar plays Joe Delan, a New York cop returning to his hometown to investigate a missing person only to uncover a web of corruption rooted deep within the American wilderness. The gunfire and motorbikes are pure 80 seconds adrenaline, yet the tone feels different, slower, heavier, like nature itself is watching. The movie's title, Quiet Cool, becomes an eerie metaphor for the surface calm of small-town life masking rot underneath. The cinematography lingers on smoke rising through trees, on the echo of gunfire swallowed by leaves, images that feel less like action and more like guilt. Beneath the machismo lies a sadness. That violence has become the only way America remembers it's alive. Ignored by critics and forgotten by audiences, Quiet Cool slipped into VHS oblivion. But its truth never aged, that beneath every quiet town is a crime nobody wants to name. By the end, Joe isn't a hero. He's a witness, one more man who's seen too much to ever be quiet again. Film 5. The Forgotten One, 1989. There's a ghost story, and then there's The Forgotten One. Directed by Philip Badger and starring Kristen Sheppard and Terry O'Quinn, the film drifts between thriller and tragedy, haunting the edges of what it means to remember. On its surface, it's a story about a writer who moves into an old house and encounters the spirit of a murdered woman. But beneath the supernatural lies something achingly human, the terror of being erased. O'Quinn's performance isn't just haunted, it's guilty. His character, a man crippled by grief, becomes a vessel for America's own forgotten sins. The wars, the lies, the silent victims buried under progress. The ghost isn't there to frighten him. She's there to remind him. Unlike the louder films of its decade, The Forgotten One whispers. It doesn't scream its message, it lingers, patiently, like a memory refusing to fade. The lighting feels like candlelight against dust. The pacing, funereal. It's not entertainment, it's a confession. And perhaps that's why it was lost among the noise, because Hollywood remembers what sells, not what scars. Yet the film endures as a quiet requiem for those stories that vanish from shelves but remain in the collective guilt of a culture. In the end, the ghost isn't what's forgotten. It's the man and the truth he tried to bury. Bonus fact: the film that never stood a chance. Between the late 80 seconds and early 90 seconds, dozens of low-budget action films were shot, edited, and then simply disappeared. Among them was Martial Law 2, Undercover, 1991. Another project featuring Cynthia Rothrock and Jeff Wincott, a sequel that should have cemented Rothrock's reign as America's first female action icon. Instead, it was quietly buried beneath the studio floorboards. On paper, it had everything: precision fight choreography, urban decay, a female lead who could outfight and outthink her male co-stars. Yet what doomed it wasn't its flaws, it was its honesty. Martial Law 2 blurred the lines between protector and predator, showing that the police and the criminals often shared the same hunger for control. For a Hollywood struggling to maintain its illusion of moral clarity, that was a story best left unseen. The studio trimmed scenes that questioned police authority, dulled the tone, and pushed the film straight to the video market. It became another casualty of censorship by silence, a movie too real to promote, too dangerous to destroy. Watching it now feels like unearthing a confession, that behind the glamour of 90 seconds action cinema, there were filmmakers who wanted to tell the truth and paid for it with invisibility. Some films fail on screen, others were never even allowed to fail. By the time the credits roll, the explosions have long faded, but the silence they leave behind says everything. These films, Rage and Honor, Excessive Force 2, Chain of Command, Quiet Cool, and The Forgotten One, were never meant to win Oscars or dominate box offices. They were built from sweat, film grain, and the kind of truth Hollywood pretends not to see. Each of them dared to ask questions the era couldn't handle. What happens when honor becomes obsolete? When justice turns into vengeance? When loyalty becomes a leash? The 80 seconds and 90 seconds loved to celebrate heroes. But these stories revealed the cost of being one, the moral fatigue, the personal ruin, the quiet rot behind the flag. Maybe that's why they were buried in bargain bins and VHS dust, because they spoke too plainly about the shadows cast by the spotlight. Cinema remembers its victories. History remembers its silences. Somewhere between the two lies these films forgotten, fractured, but still whispering. Because truth doesn't disappear. It just waits for someone to rewind. If these forgotten reels still echo in your mind, you've already heard what Hollywood tried to silence. These films weren't mistakes. They were warnings, wrapped in fight scenes and gunfire, edited until their messages barely survived. But you can still feel them in the cuts, in the pauses, in the things left unsaid. There are more stories like these. More films that spoke too loudly and were buried too quickly. And if you keep watching, listening, and remembering, maybe we can bring their truths back into the light. So, look closer next time you see a movie they forgot to mention. The secret isn't gone. It's just waiting in the next frame. Real secrets, where the truth was always in the edit.